Thanks everyone for coming along to the session today. I'm going to be talking a little bit about graph search, Facebook's search engine, but also kind of how understanding how graph search works actually sets you up really, really nicely for understanding how all of the search engines are going to work in the future. So my name's Kelvin Newman. I wear a few different hats. I organise a few different digital marketing conferences, free to attend ones, Brighton SEO, Content Marketing Show, and Measure Fest. I also work for a digital marketing agency. I've been there 7 years. They're called Site Visibility. We work with people like Hotels.com and Cheap Flights. And also more recently, I set up a recruitment business with the lofty ambition to be the world's least rubbish recruitment business. But I want to start off by revealing a bit of a secret. So I've been, and I might get in a bit of trouble for this, but I've been let into a secret beta of how Google is going to work in the future. And that is graph search, right? Now, joking aside, Facebook's graph search is a great indicator of the future of Google. And I think we ought to take the time to understand how it works, whether or not we believe that graph search is the future. Now, hands up, just a quick straw poll. Who thinks Facebook graph search is the best search engine in the world? Okay, there's two of us. That's one more than we normally get when I ask this question. And I'm not here to convince you that graph search will necessarily catch on. But if you imagine the area of this slide represents all of the traffic available on the internet, so this whole screen is all of the traffic. That much of it is Facebook. And everything else in white is the rest of the internet. So that's Google, YouTube, Wikipedia, the Daily Mail. It's your website, it's my website, it's her website, it's his website. So if anyone's really equipped to build a Google killer, it's potentially Facebook. But there's a fundamental difference between how Facebook deal with the challenge of a search engine and how Google do, or at least how Google currently do. Now with Google, their paradigm's fairly simple, right? So they're about documents and links between those documents. So many of you will be familiar with SEO. There'll be two elements to a typical SEO campaign. They'll be improving your documents, the pages of your site, and they'll be improving the links or the signals about those pages that exist. Now Facebook is slightly different in the way that they return search results. And they're about things and relationships, right? So they're not about documents, they're not about returning a document, it's about returning a thing and being able to search for that thing based upon a relationship. Now that sounds like a subtle difference, but it's actually a huge difference between how they approach the problem of a search engine. And actually I think that the way that Facebook are approaching this currently is actually much better for the web as we know it and the web as it's going to be in the future. Now Google are trying to catch up. They're trying to build a search engine which reflects some of the functionality which is available in graph search, but they're going to struggle to catch up because Facebook's data, what they have, has a far more explicit structure than traditional web pages. So to give you an example, it might not be that hard for Google to understand a statement like, I like Nerf guns, right? They can kind of understand, I, one person, Nerf guns, that's another thing, and there's a relationship between them. They can kind of suppose and assume and work that out. And they probably could even have a go at a phrase like, I was at Bodine's on Poland Street for lunch yesterday, right? If I marked it up in the right way and they knew enough about me, they could probably understand that. But they have a much harder job of understanding things like I'm married to Carolyn, because Facebook know that happened in 2007, they know who attended the ceremony, they know when we got engaged, they know all kinds of things about me and that relationship. And that's between two people, but if you imagine that they are building all of these types of understanding of the structure of relationships between people and brands. Now Google have to infer that structure, right? They have to try and understand or guess what that structure is. But in Facebook, they know the structure. It is implicit there. And I think an important thing to understand when we're talking about graph search is you're not really making a search in the way you are when you go on Google. Actually, what you're doing really is just filtering the structured database that Facebook have of all of the data that they have. And that's a huge database, right? Ridiculously huge. They have 1 billion users every month. 240 million photos uploaded per day. 2.7 billion likes. 2.7 billion likes. And people share billions of pieces of content every day, right? And there's 1 trillion connections of 1,000 different types, right? Now on Google you've got a document and a link. That's the type of connection that you've got. On Facebook there's thousands of different types of connections, and there's 1 trillion of them. It's a big number. So how does graph search work, right? Now if you imagine on Facebook, every user, every page, every photo, every post, every place, that's what's known as a node, right? And every friendship, what have I done to my deck there? Every friendship, every check-in, every tag is an edge, right? So if you imagine that you've got these 2 types of thing on Facebook. You have nodes, that's people. I'm a node, you're a node. Excel's a node, the digital marketing show is a node, the company I work for is a node, the hotel you stay in is a node. They're all things, they're the nouns, right? And between 2 nouns you have relationships, they're the verbs, right? So I like a business, I checked into a location, you know, all of these connections between them. And each of those nodes, so each of those things, right, that's a bit of a computer sciencey word, but they're pages, they're people, they're photos, they're assets, all of these things that are created on Facebook. Now each of those have metadata associated with them, right? And that's how the old Facebook search sort of worked, in inverted commas, right? So all it was a keyword match against the words in that metadata, and that's why it was poor, right? So you'd have a brand like Breville, and they would have their mission statement, and they'd have their description, and when you were making a search on Facebook, all you were doing was a keyword search against that description. And that wasn't that effective. What they've done is they've improved that. So what graph search allows you to do is to search for the edges as well as the nodes, right? So you've got the ability to search for things that have relationships to other things. So hotels my friends like, or bands my friends like, or you know, things that are liked by friends of my friends. You have all of this ability to search the edges as well as the nodes. So to give you an example of how that might work, right? So what graph search really is a filter, right? It's like if you imagine in a database, it's a filter that's taking place. So if I wanted to find friends, we would essentially search, now this is in the back end, this is not what you do, but if you imagine this is what the system is doing behind the scenes, right? So we've got friend, right? So that is someone who is a friend of person. If my user number was 10,003. So that would give me, if we imagine our filtering that we're doing, everyone who is a friend of mine. And we're then filtering them by having an edge type of lives in and 111, which is New York, right? So we've filtered everyone who's my friend, that's removed everyone who's not. We've then filtered for everyone who lives in New York. And we're then filtering it by a third metric, which is liking 222, which is Downton Abbey. So if that kind of helps you understand how it works, that you're filtering and filtering and filtering, but you can nest these filters on top of each other, which is incredibly powerful. Now when that filtering takes place, there's a sorting that goes on, right? So Facebook are trying to determine, when I found all of my friends who like Downton Abbey, who live in New York, how do I choose the order of them? Or if I look for hotels in Barcelona that my friends have stayed at, if they've stayed at more than one hotel, or there is more than one hotel returned, how do they decide what ranks? Well, they've said Facebook use query-independent signals to come up with a numeric value of importance, and they talk about the static rank. Now, a couple of things which are important about that statement that they made is that it's query-independent. So it doesn't matter what the search term was, it's just about the one that is the best result based upon these factors. And they talk about the static rank of that entity. Now, while there's still kind of some discussion about what that static rank is made up for, sensibly it could be informed by elements of EdgeRank. So I don't know if people are familiar with EdgeRank, but EdgeRank was the old name for the newsfeed algorithm. So there was a series of rules which determine what did appear in your newsfeed and what didn't appear in your newsfeed. Now, Facebook have now gone on and improved that and no longer refer to it as EdgeRank, but the foundations of that are still the same, right? So the rules that they use, the patterns that were there, still underpin everything that Facebook do. It's more sophisticated now, but if we understand how that works, we can maybe get a bit of a sense of what might inform where, who is returned best when a graph search query is made. So you can read all about that EdgeRank thing. And it looks complicated, but essentially there's 3 elements to the EdgeRank algorithm, which from my experience seems to inform, when making graph search queries, which appear the top results. Now the first of those is affinity. So affinity is this idea of how closely connected you are to a person, or an individual, or to a page. And you can send affinity in a variety of different ways. And when talking about it in the newsfeed context, what I often kind of talk about is if you've ever looked at the profile of someone you used to work with, and or an ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend or ex-boss or someone you used to work with, and suddenly they appear in your newsfeed all the time. That's because you sent a signal of affinity by looking at their profiles, looking at their photos. You said to Facebook, I'm interested in these people. But equally, affinity can be generated if you're tagged in statuses together, you're tagged in photos together, you look at their profile, you receive messages from them. So how does this play in the context of graph search? Well, if I'm searching for hotels in Barcelona that my friends have liked, the closeness, the affinity that you have to the friends should have an impact on how likely they are to appear. So this closeness is a part of it. So that's why every search that someone makes on graph search is entirely unique to them. Whereas there are differences, if you made a search on Google and you made a search on Google, there might be some differences between them, but largely they'd be quite similar. On graph search, that just doesn't exist. There's just so much more personalization taking place, and affinity is part of that. You've then got weight. So weight is a kind of, in the newsfeed context, that's why status updates with lots of likes are more likely to appear in a newsfeed than a status update that has no likes or no interaction, right? We understand that. Well, that's the same in graph search. So a hotel, if we're using that analogy, that's been visited by lots of people is more likely to appear than a hotel that's not been checked into by lots of people. Now, initially, when graph search was announced, my inclination was that affinity would be the big factor, right? So it'd be, what have my friends done? That would be the one that's influencing it. And that is part of the equation, but it's far more about weight, right? So how much interaction has there been in total? So that's good news for us, right? Because we can influence that. And the final of those 3 elements is what's known as decay. But actually what that means is time. So how recent. Now, I don't think this is having as much a part to play in graph search at the moment as it could do. But if you imagine, if we're going back to the hotel ones, if we had 2 completely identical situations, so we had 3 friends that have both checked into 2 different hotels, and I'm equally friendly with each of those 3 friends on the affinity score. At that point, it might well be how recent were those check-ins, or how recent were those likes, could have a factor in what's playing there. So what does that mean for us as businesses that we're trying to promote what we're doing? Well, actually, the value of a legitimate like from a well-connected person just increased. Right? Or an interaction from a legitimate, well-connected person. So what you're now trying to do is actually, whereas in the past we might have thought about collecting likes being very much a bad thing, and I don't think that's still a great objective to have for a Facebook campaign, but having well-connected people interacting with your brand increases the likelihood of you appearing in graph search. And if you're a business where people might be discovering you in that way, then there's a value to having those well-connected people. Now, that doesn't mean that you should go off and buy 10,000 likes. That is exactly not what you want to be doing. But if you're having customers who are interacting with you, that is good. You should be leading people in that direction because it's good for your likelihood of appearing in graph search. But I also wanted to talk about Google, right? Because everything that Facebook are doing happens in a context, right? And Google are learning a lot. And if I talk about Facebook being perhaps a good example of where search might be heading, let's talk about some of the ways in which Google are learning about that and changing their approach. So there's been a lot going on at Google. And that's not just new updates, right? Hummingbird, one of the more recent ones. It's not what I'm talking about. There's a new paradigm in how Google are presenting their search results that ties very closely into this idea of how graph search works. And that's the idea of knowledge graph. And technically a few things that perhaps aren't really technically knowledge graph, but sort of fit into that general theme of this change. Now, if you've never heard of knowledge graph before, Amit Singhal from Google defined it as knowledge graph enables you to search for things, people, or places, so the nodes we were talking about previously, that Google knows about. So they know about landmarks, celebrities, cities, sports teams, geographical features, movies, celestial objects, works of art, and more, and instantly get information that's relevant to that query. Right? So this was a change in how they presented their results based upon a change in their back-end systems of how they did it. So it's a change in how Google delivers search results. So I'm now going to give you lots of examples quickly of some of those changes in the way that they present the results. And as I said, not all of them are truly knowledge graphs. So if you're an SEO geek, I apologize if I'm lumping some things in that kind of fit that broad theme, but might not technically be exactly that. But they do indicate a general shift in the way in which Google presents search results. So if you search for Manchester traffic, you get a live traffic map showing where there is traffic at the moment that is busy in Manchester. If I search for Old Trafford, a location, I get the latest sport. This is from a screen grab from a couple of months ago, but the latest result that they had there, as well as all of this information here. This is new. This isn't a page. These are the pages that we were used to seeing in Google. This is different to that. If you search for an individual, you get results here as well. All of this is the knowledge graph. All of this is new. All of this is something that potentially you might not be getting in those search results for have you not set yourself up in the right way. And you get it again. This is for currency exchanges, and there's more than 85 of these different features that, new ways of Google presenting information on their search results that isn't about sending you to a new page on a new website. There's a great presentation, and I'll put this presentation up on SlideShare itself, but it's from Dr. Pete from moz.com, and it's beyond the 10 blue links. But they were just for informational queries, weren't they? Where people are looking for, the answer to a particular question that's informational. But no, they're on commercial queries as well. This is credit cards. This is slightly different, but here you search for credit cards, and we've got here Google showing, this is sponsored results, but showing different credit cards, what their interest rates are, how long they work for. That's that structured data that's taking place there as well. And this one is for flights to Manchester, right? So here I've got the flights that are taking place from London. I know which airlines fly from London to Manchester. Do I really need to go to the travel comparison engine that I would previously have gone to with this type of result there, right? Because I know that British Airways and Virgin Atlantic are the only options. Do I now go to kayak.com to make a comparison of flight results as well? Again, if I search for a particular hotel, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting and a little bit scary, right? So we've got, we're all very used to these kind of star reviews appearing on certain search queries. But I search for a particular hotel, I've got the reviews there that might influence my decision to book there or not book there. But we've also got more reviews on these particular websites. If I'm a hotel comparison site and I'm not in those lists, potentially that's a missed opportunity for people coming through and booking from me there as well. But it gets even scarier than that. Now I search for Bodine's in Soho, right? That's a barbecue place in Poland Street, as we talked about earlier, right? I search for that, I get the result down the side the knowledge graph. And in there they had a list of the top 10 places to eat pulled pork in London. I like pulled pork, I'll look at that list, I pop it up, I've got all of these lists from Zagat, which Google own, right? I click through to one of those, I go to PicQ Company in Newbury Street. I searched for a particular brand, one place, I wanted to find out their address, 2 clicks, I've gone off and gone to someone else. That's not a paid search result where someone's bidding on your name, right? So there's all these changes that are happening there as well. That one's for event and conference tickets, that one's for books. So here, if I click there, I go through to the Barnes & Noble result rather than Google. Barnes & Noble don't rank anywhere in these natural results here, but by putting their data across in a way that Google can understand, they're able to get in the search results there. So what does that mean? What are all these kind of patterns? What's that all about? Well, it's a change in purpose for what Google are about, right? So whereas if we think about Google's purpose in the past, it might have been to help people find pages. But actually now what they're doing there is helping people find answers. And they might be finding answers without them ever going to your website. So you can no longer rely on Google to send traffic to your website from their search engine. Or even tell you about it if they do, right? So for nearly a year, iPhone search traffic, people on iPhones searching, ending up on your website, was by default disattributed to direct traffic in your Google Analytics account. So people are searching for you on an iPhone, coming from Google, and on your analytics report, it shows up as direct. That happened. That has happened. And of course, many of you will be familiar with not provided, right? So when people are signed into Google and they search and end up on your website, whereas historically you would know which keyword they came through to your site on, no longer can you get that information if they came through from Google. So you no longer know what's sending you traffic. So there's a question that I think most of us need to ask ourselves. Can we make money if nobody ever comes to our website? Because what Google and what Facebook are doing, Facebook's keeping you within Facebook. Google are keeping you on Google. Potentially the amount of traffic that's coming through to your website is reducing as a consequence. So you may need to revisit your business model, right? Now, if you want to go through that process, I cannot recommend highly enough the idea of the business model canvas, which is there's a book about it, but you can get all of the information you would need from that Wikipedia page, which talks about that. But potentially you need to sit down and ask, well, could my business have an API, right? Which sounds a bit scary for those of you who are perhaps not so familiar with that. But essentially, every business is really just a database, right? So if you're an e-commerce, you're a database of the products that you sell. Right? If you're a publisher, you're a database of the articles which you have produced. And your website is just a front end to that. So there's a database sitting behind all of that. And Google want to become that front end, right? So they don't necessarily think that in the best cases, most people are right to be in that position. So, coming towards the end here, hopefully I've not scared you too much, but there is this change that's happening. And Facebook graph search, understand that, huge opportunity. But people say, Kelvin, I don't think it's ever going to be as big as Google. Maybe, maybe not, but it's still really, really interesting to understand, because if you can understand graph search, which is relatively simple, all of this stuff that Google are doing suddenly then starts to make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to give you some practical things you can go back to the office tomorrow and potentially do about this. So familiarize yourself with Freebase, right? So Freebase is owned by Google, but essentially it's a database of things, of nodes, right? So it's typically things like cities, movie stars, films, songs, albums. And there's another one called DBpedia as well. And it's amazing the information that they have and these free databases that anyone can access. And Google are using these databases to understand. So this is a visualization of the actors in James Bond films. Each of the colors represents a film, and each of the connections shows that they were in a film with someone else. And then the size of the circles represents how likely they are to be connected to other people, right? So already you can start to see that these are the actors who are the most important people in the James Bond films in terms of the extra connections that they have to them. And if any of the keywords that are currently sending traffic to your website contain, or in any of those databases, you're going to see those knowledge graph boxes appearing, right? You're going to see Google trying to present their data in a slightly different way. And that might be a little bit full on, but there's a great tool called Blue Nod, right, which allows you to put in a hashtag, right? And then it shows you the connections to people who are tweeting about that hashtag. Because what you'll find is different communities manifest themselves in different ways, right? So this is 3 different conferences. So this is MeasureFest, one I organise, and the scale of the dots is how frequently they're mentioned by other people within the community. Now these people here are my speakers, right, at the conferences I organise. Now for me, I will wait for the feedback. I will wait and see which speakers are the best reported upon when we have our feedback scores. But I can, during the day, already see which of my speakers have got the best results on the day because people are talking about them. right? But that's even different within one community. So that's one conference. This is Distilled, who did a different one. And similar sort of scale of event, but a very different network that we've got there. So I'm starting to see that different networks operate in different ways. So in your social space, you can start to understand how they operate differently. And if you want to get a little bit more involved again, you can take those databases that exist out there and start to put them together. Here I've put in the films Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, and Jackie Brown, and it's showing me those 3 different entities, what the connections are between them, right? And these are different entities as well. And then we have the edge type, which is writer. So have a play with Visual Data Web as well. You can see a bit more there. The next 2 are perhaps a little bit easier, not quite so involved. Next time you're building a new website, you must have on the specification that you have Open Graph Protocol implemented. And that's just the metadata that means that when someone takes your page and shares it on Facebook, that you get a good photo, that you get a good title. We've all done it where you've gone to share a page on Facebook and it chooses a random picture, or the title is horrible and not what the headline was. That's because they didn't have Open Graph Protocol implemented. It's very easy to implement on an existing site, definitely worth doing. But if you're speccing a site, that's got to be one of the tick boxes. And any web designer that doesn't do that for you, I think is being a bit remiss. And the next of those is schema.org, which is a similar kind of system where all of the search engines have got together and said, if you are a recipe site, this is how you should put together the code of your site to say you're a recipe site. Or actually, if you're a site that lists people's contact details, here's how you should describe the address, so we as the search engines know that's the address. And there's dozens of these different ways in which you can mark up your content to make it friendly to the search engines. So go to schema.org, or if indeed you're working with a web developer, and say which schema.org protocol is relevant to our business. Because there will be, and if you can mark yours up in a way, it means that when we go back to those Google screenshots we were seeing, when Booking.com or Barnes & Noble were appearing, they were appearing because they marked up their content in a way that the search engines liked. And if that wasn't enough, some action points as well. There's a great deck that kind of builds upon this. This was like an hour-and-a-half presentation given in Seattle earlier this year, called Strings to Things, the Move to Semantic SEO. And this is done by Matthew Brown from Moz. Great deck, expands upon some of the themes I've been talking about here, and does well. But my final takeaway is just do good marketing, right? Because I think it's really important to understand this context, really important to understand the systems, the patterns that operate underneath. But all of those systems and patterns are trying to do is reflect which is the best business, right? Who is doing the best marketing? But a computer can't understand that. They have to find rules, they have to find patterns to do that. Now, you can't go too far wrong by doing just good marketing, but I think the people who do really, really well do good marketing and understand the rules and understand the patterns. So to sum up in a couple of words, SEO is changing. It's not about optimizing your website for search engines. It's actually about optimizing your businesses for search engines as well. So thank you very much. I don't think we've got a huge amount of time for questions and answers in these sessions, but if anyone does want to grab me, I'll be here for 10-15 minutes, and if anyone wants to tweet me, I'm happy to follow up some questions afterwards. So thanks very much, guys. Cheers.